Good morning. It is an absolute honor and privilege to be with you here today. Let me ask you a quick question. How many of you, as marketers, are being held more accountable today than you were 2 years ago? Show of hands. Most of us, right? I think Joe Chernoff in his State of Inbound message highlighted his most important slide yesterday, and at the top of it was ROI. More and more of us are being held accountable for ROI. But you're here in the Bold Talks room. So let's put away marketing for a second. Let's put away business. And what I'd like you to do is transition. Maybe close your eyes if you have to. And I want you to think about the most amazing experiences you've ever had in your life. And now that you've got those in your mind, I want you to try and assign a monetary value to those. For the moments that led up to those, the steps and the investments, I want you to think about the ROI on those things that resulted in those experiences. If you're anything like me, that's a ludicrous question and a ludicrous way to think about those things. Because when I think about the most amazing experiences in my life, the birth of my first son, or my second, or my third, of course, I got to include them all. When I think about walking down the aisle with my bride in front of friends and family from all stages of my life up until that point, when I think about making amazing plays in front of 50,000 screaming fans, to liken those to some monetary value or ROI just cheapens the whole experience. So I want you to think about ROI, but I want to talk today about ROI on things that are immeasurable. There was a gal by the name of Brownie Ware. And Brownie Ware was a palliative nurse, which basically means that she cared for people as they were going onto their deathbed. And she noticed several common traits of people as they were dying. Unfortunately, many of them had regrets. And many of them had the same common regrets. And if you Google this, you'll find out. She wrote a blog post and ultimately a book. But the two things that stood out the most as the most common regrets were, I wish I would have lived a life more true to myself and not done things that others expected of me, was number one. And number two was, I wish I didn't work so much. I want you to think about those things as we consider all the stuff that we're doing, but sit on that for a minute as we talk for the next few minutes. 10 years ago today, I was in a very, very different place doing very, very different things. In fact, this was my view, not a bad view. That is my wife on a beautiful beach in Indonesia. And what you should know is that we weren't there for a week or 2 weeks, but we were 6 months in to a journey around the world. We had spent a lot of time in India and Australia. We had trekked in the Himalayas, as you heard earlier. We climbed through the tunnels that the Viet Cong used in Vietnam. We had seen Angkor Wat in Cambodia. We had gone scuba diving in the south of Thailand. We had all these amazing adventures in front of us. And you might be asking yourself, why? How? So let me give you a quick background. How many of you after undergrad college either went backpacking or knew somebody that went backpacking in Europe? Show of hands. Many of you, right? Same thing. So what was originally going to be a 3-week trip for me ultimately turned into 5 weeks and ultimately turned into almost a year in Western Europe for me, spending time doing amazing things, learning about different cultures and languages and all these sorts of things. And during that time of running with the bulls in Pamplona and snowboarding across the Alps and speaking with people in different languages and learning different foods, I gained this love for travel because it reduced me once again to a kindergartner. Everything was new again. Everything was fascinating again. And I thought to myself, man, I would love to do this again. I'd love to do this more someday, and I'd love to do it with a significant other. Well, my wife was on a very, very same journey. And so we got married. And we got to a place where we said, well, we've got great careers. My business was doing well. Her career was going very, very well. And we had a house and a couple of cars and a dog. And many of our friends were getting married and having kids and doing all that sort of stuff. And the trajectory was very predictable. We knew what was there. And as we walked down that journey, we kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, but this thing we talked about doing someday, if we don't do it now, we may never do it. And if we do it, it'll be 30 years down the road and it'll look somewhat different. So we made a choice. And we traveled after Indonesia for another 9 months. We walked the Great Wall of China. We traveled through Eastern Europe. We went in South America and in Patagonia, saw the southernmost city in the world, Ushuaia, where you actually launched. And David Marion Scott talked about going to Antarctica yesterday. That's where you launched from. Spent time in a magical place called Easter Island, and again and again and again, and I could tell stories all day. And before, during, and after this trip, I was continually met with this comment: "That's amazing. I wish I could do that." And friends, I didn't come from any special background. Middle American guy, made some choices and certainly some sacrifices along the way. And if I think back to the women and the men that lay on their deathbed with regrets, it's directly related to their choices. Either the choices they did make or the choices they didn't make. I'd like to tell you some stories that made a profound impact. Most of our time when we traveled around the world for 15 months was spent in the developing world. So we got to come face to face and eye to eye and share drinks and meals with people that come from a completely different socioeconomic class than us. People who live on $300 or $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 a year. We were in a small village in northern Laos. For those of you that don't know where Laos is, it's a small country in Southeast Asia. And there was a young boy that was about college age, and he invited us over for dinner. He wanted to practice his English, and we felt extremely honored. So as we sat down for dinner with this boy and his uncle began to tell us how he had lived in a cave for 12 years. And he only came out at night to feed his family through fishing and farming. And as we began to ask why, through his nephew translating for us, he talked about during the Vietnam War, the southern Vietnamese had cut off the path to the northern Vietnamese. So that sent the Viet Cong over into northern Laos. And daily, for 12 years, the Americans bombed their village. And so I sat here as an American going like, oh my goodness, here I am eating this man's food that he's providing for me. And he was subjected to 12 years in a cave. And as I was eating the shrimp that they had caught that day, see, because they didn't really have refrigeration, and discarding the shells like we do, he asked if he could eat them. And it struck me so hard, and it said, wow, who am I? That I happen to be born with such opportunity and privilege. By American standards, nothing incredibly special. But by world standards, incredibly special. Another quick story. We were in India, Western India, and we went on a camel trek for a few days out in the desert, and it was a fascinating learning experience. All we saw were sand dunes for hours at a time. And camels, I don't know if any of you have ever ridden camels, they're not that comfortable. But it was fascinating. We got to see, occasionally we'd come across villages of people living in mud huts. There was one day where these kids came out of nowhere. It was like the middle of a Star Wars movie, and I didn't know how to play cricket, but I was playing cricket with these kids. And it was that human connection that I saw over and over again through these stories that made me think, come to the reality that, man, we are all human. We all want the same things. We want to share a laugh and a smile and time together, and we want to be connected in a relationship. We are all the same. I just happen to be born in a different place. During the time of this, I asked our guide, Sudhir, one day, as we were heading back and stopped for a little bit of shade under a tree, I began asking him fundamental questions about what he did. You know, how much does a camel cost? And how do you find people like us? And, you know, basic marketing and business questions. And it dawned on me that as I was asking these, and I expected an readily available answer, he didn't have one. He never thought like this. And not only were the people that I met with and I got to engage with financially less financial opportunities, but they also weren't exposed to the education or technology or broadband. And as I came home after spending 15 months on the road, going to 25 countries on 5 continents, I couldn't quite reconcile the fact that a lot of the world lives on just a few $1,000s a year, and yet here on Sunset Boulevard, there were several people driving $100,000 cars. And I wasn't being judgmental, but I just couldn't reconcile it in my mind. So I was looking for an opportunity to give back. I was asked to join an organization on the board of directors called the International Princess Project. A friend of mine had actually gone to India and come face to face with the red light district. And Mumbai actually has one of the largest red light districts in the world, and she began to learn about human trafficking and slavery that still goes on today. And her heart broke. And so she quit her very lucrative sales job, and she started an organization called International Princess Project, and I got the privilege to be part of that. I'd love for you to Google it. I'd love for you to find out more, but the net result is that at this point, thousands of women and tens of thousands of women worldwide have now benefited from giving these women a new chance at life. Hope and dignity and restoration. And during the time that I was involved with International Princess Project, and I served a couple of times on their board for periods of a few years, I began to learn about how some of these women were rescued out of the sex trade, and some of them came out because they were bought for just a couple $100. And when you talk about ROI that's immeasurable, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the fact that how can a human life be purchased for a couple $100? In fact, today, I've also learned that there are more slaves in the world today than there have been ever in the history of mankind. I didn't know that. Maybe many of you don't know that. I thought that went away with slave ships from Africa. There are more slaves in the world today than there have been ever in the history of mankind. So, in terms of choices and decisions, and you've heard me mention that a couple times here, it's sort of framed my view on the world a little bit differently as I've witnessed these along the course of my adventures. And now I have to make choices like, and by the way, full disclosure, I probably will buy an iPhone 6, okay? But when we began to think about value for money and ROI for our investment, the reality is I can buy 3 human lives and set them free for the same price that I can buy an iPhone. If I want a new pair of Citizens or Sevens or some designer jeans, the reality is that a lot of the world, there are millions of people that die from malnutrition each year. You could feed a small village for a month for about the same price. Or those latest seasonal designer boots, the folks at Charity Water and other similar organizations could actually provide clean drinking water for 10 people for up to 20 years. And when we began to evaluate the world looking at these facts, it makes us scratch our head. And if we begin to consider things where the ROI is actually immeasurable, we might make different choices. This is a quote that struck me. And the sad thing is I believe it's all too true. Too many people spend money they haven't earned to buy things they don't want, to impress people they don't like. So today, as I close, I'm going to ask you to consider making 3 choices. Number 1, please don't be those people that have regrets on your deathbed. Your adventures and your dreams might look totally different from mine, but if you've got that nagging feeling inside, that thing that keeps rearing its head and you keep pushing it till someday, I would invite you to take a step. What would it look like to actually convert someday into now? And along the course of my adventures, I found lots of opportunities to help other people, and I believe that you will too. And I would invite you to look for opportunities to make immeasurable change. The price of a human life, clean drinking water, keeping someone from dying from starvation. This also applies to your neighborhoods and your communities and the stuff that's in your heart and along the path of your adventures. And when I begin to look at this room and this conference, and I consider the financial resources that we all have, and not just financial, but man, we're the tip of the spear. You guys are the smartest people in the world as it comes to innovative marketing. Your talents, your experience, your drive, all the stuff that you know about technology, what if we were to collectively look at a problem and say, you know what, we're all going to give a little bit? What would this world be like if we did more of that? So I invite us to do that together. And I invite you to hold me accountable, because guys, one of the reasons I'm up here is because I feel like I haven't done enough of this, given what I've done and given what I've seen. I look forward to hearing about your adventure. Thank you for your time. My name is Brian Vellmure.